Hello, I am Jamey, author of Fragment of Divinity, owner of many chest hairs, and paladin of the Ninth Shiny Rock, and I am here to read to you the first chapter of my book, Fragment of Divinity, which I think I already mentioned. Yeah, let's get started. I'm gonna read to you from that. Anyway, alright, Chapter 1. James woke in a small unlit room. This wasn't unusual for him. He'd just started his first job as a paramedic, and as the lowest employee on the totem pole, he'd been given the role of rover. This meant working in a different station almost every shift, depending on the schedule. So, waking up to a blaring alarm and a sudden flash of light was nothing new to him. That being said, he'd never woken up in a room quite like this one. As James looked around, his first thought was medieval holding cell. He consulted his mental checklist. Iron-barred door with comically large keyhole? Check. Inexplicably damp walls? Check. Unidentifiable green growth on aforementioned walls? Check and check. Creepy man standing in the corner? Check. Wait, creepy man standing in the corner? What? James paused. How hadn't he noticed the man standing in the corner? The dude had to be at least 7 feet tall. James knew it was rude to stare, but it was also rude to lock someone in a cell, so who was the real asshole here? The man had an almost sculpted angelic face, complemented by a well-fitting suit and tie. He looked like an actor on the way to the Golden Globes. James would have laughed at how out of place the stranger looked in the dirty, dank cell if he hadn't also been there. The man returned James' stare with unreadable onyx eyes. The only noise in the room was a faint ticking sound coming from the man's watch. Finally, James broke the silence. Hi. The man raised an eyebrow at James, sighed, and with tremendous effort, pushed himself off the wall. He walked over to James and held out his hand. Baradiel. James stared at the hand before hesitantly shaking it, wincing at the vice-like grip. Baradiel smiled thinly. James, right? Welcome to Novus. He had an air of smug indifference that immediately irritated James. His tone said that James should be grateful to be in the room, listening to him speak, that James wasn't worth his time, that James should just shut up and listen, if he knew what was good for him. Baradiel stared at James as if daring him to say something. Fortunately, James was used to dealing with annoying pricks in positions of authority, so he kept his mouth shut. Baradiel shrugged, as if to say, whatever, I didn't want you to say anything anyway. Then he spoke. His tone conveyed boredom, as if he'd given the same speech hundreds of times, but his eyes gave off a different vibe. They stayed focused on James' face, scrutinizing every slight change in his facial expression. I know you're probably confused about all this. He gestured at the surrounding cell. Well, basically, we brought you here for a contest. We took you from your world because you showed a bit of the quality we seek. He looked at James as if expecting a reaction. When none came, he continued. Think of this as a job interview. He smiled. A deadly job interview. His voice dripped with false cheeriness. You'll have lots of time to figure that out later. The only thing you need to know right now is that this world is what you mortals call a video game. Observe. Baradiel waved his hands and a screen appeared in front of James' eyes. Please choose your name. James stared at the screen for a second. This certainly was a strange dream. James? Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw Baradiel roll his eyes and place his head in his hands. His palms slid down his face with exaggerated slowness. James ignored the man. Demon? No clue. He continued reading the prompt. Would you like to confirm, James, as your name? No. James paused for a second. He still didn't really understand what was happening, and Baradiel wasn't helping. The entity? Entity sounded good. The entity stood in the corner, staring at James while tapping his foot in annoyance. Just James, he said more confidently this time. Would you like to confirm just James as your name? Now James was getting annoyed. This may be a dream, but his inner psyche was kind of a dick. No, he tried again. James. Would you like to confirm James as your name? Yes. Another screen popped up. Welcome to Novus, James. There it was again. Novus. James turned to Baradiel. What's Novus? He asked. Baradiel sighed. Please save your questions until the end. And not what? Where? That statement left James even more confused than before. Baradiel sighed. Just read the prompts, you'll figure it out. Another prompt appeared. Choose your race. Human. Humans age much quicker than other races. Their shorter lifespan leads to a faster pace, allowing them to specialize into much broader categories than other races. Bonuses. Plus 25% experience gained in all skills. Plus 4 free attribute points per level. Dwarf. While short in stature, dwarves are strong and sturdy. Their stature makes them the perfect size to live underground. Dwarves live in large cave systems dug into the mountains. The largest dwarven settlement is a deep within the Crimson Mountains on the western border of the Forsyth Empire. Bonuses. Plus 2 strength per level. Plus 1 endurance per level. Plus 3 free attribute points per level. Wood Elf. Elves are the longest-lived race in Novus, with an average lifespan of 5 centuries. Wood Elves do not believe in large cities and live off the land in the fertile expanse. Bonuses. Plus 10% movement speed in wooded areas. Plus 1 intelligence per level. Plus 2 dexterity per level. Plus 2 free attribute points per level. High Elf. Elves are the longest-lived race in Novus, with an average lifespan of 5 centuries. High Elves are the most talented in the magical arts. Supposedly, there is an ancient High Elf city tucked away deep within the fertile expanse, but if there is, no other race has ever seen it and lived to tell the tale. Bonuses. Plus 10% spellcasting speed. Plus 1 dexterity per level. Plus 1 intelligence per level. Plus 1 wisdom per level. Plus 2 free attribute points per level. Gnome. Gnomes are the most intelligent of the sentient races. Long ago, they fled the unceasing wars of the other races to pursue their obsession with advancing the understanding of the world. They combine magic and technology in new and exciting ways. Their grand library is truly a marvel to behold. Bonuses. Plus 10% to intelligence. Plus 2 intelligence per level. Plus 1 dexterity per level. Plus 2 free attribute points per level. James was beginning to understand what was happening. As an avid gamer, he loved role-playing games the most. And this was just like the race selection screen for an RPG. As James scrolled down the list with a thought, he saw most of the races had been grayed out. He clicked on the gnome race, interested in the magic and technology, but a notification popped up telling him he'd have to choose another race. He scrolled through hundreds of unique races. Some were too alien to him, like the snake beastkin race, while others, like the gnome race, were grayed out and inaccessible to him. Out of the corner of his eye, James saw Baradiel tapping his foot in annoyance, but with so many races to choose from, James needed to make sure he was making the best choice. Baradiel made a grand display of banging his head against the wall. After an hour of reading through his options and ticking off this entity, James decided he would stick with human. Out of the handful of races available to him, it was the only one he could see himself as. But he wondered when this dream would end. Maybe it was one of the lucid dreams he'd heard about. They were supposed to be super realistic. James tried pinching himself and yelped. He turned to Baradiel. This is a dream, right? Baradiel laughed bitterly. I wish. He then went back to tapping his foot, waiting for James to finalize his choice. But James stood, frozen. There's no way this was real. It's impossible. What about my friends and family at home? What about my life? I just got my first paramedic job. James pushed those thoughts to the back of his mind and returned his attention to the menus. Once he chose human as his race, a new menu opened up, giving him the option to customize his appearance. He wondered how much he could change for his appearance. He changed his skin color to pale, then dark, then went through the hairstyle options. It was fun changing the body on the menu and watching himself change in real time, but it felt strange, as if his body was made of a cold mist that reshaped itself at his command. Once he got bored with changing his appearance, he reset it to default. From there, he changed his hair color from brown to black and made himself slightly taller. Perfect. A new menu popped up, asking him to confirm his selection. He turned to Baradiel. Now that he had time to process what Baradiel had said, he was angry. What do you mean, you wish? Baradiel sighed. I mean, I wish it were a dream, and I wish I didn't have to put up with useless mortals like you. Now please get on with it. Some of us important beings have work to do. James never took kindly to insults and didn't appreciate the implication that his kidnapping was unimportant. He glared at Baradiel, angrily curling his hands into fists. You're a dick. Baradiel shrugged, his nonchalant expression infuriating James even more. Send me home. He pulled back a fist and punched Baradiel in the face. Or tried to. Baradiel's hand blurred, and he caught James' fist in an icy grip. James could feel the cold spreading down his hand into his wrist and forearm. It hurt, and his skin was turning blue. Baradiel looked him dead in the eye, the anger clear in his gaze. His eyes changed from coal black to a deep, bright blue, like two glowing splinters of ice lodged in his skull. Never speak to me like that, he hissed. I am better than you. Remember that. Baradiel released James his hand and smiled again, as if the incident never occurred. I'll tell you what. When you wake up, you'll have a quest. If you can complete the quest, then I'll send you back to your family. Deal? James rubbed at his numb arm. Baradiel interrupted him. Also, never try to punch me again. The message was punctuated by a fist to his face. Something about being punched in the face by a demon, or whatever Baradiel was, hurt. A lot. James clutched at his face, stars dancing in front of his eyes, and moaned. Baradiel smiled and snapped his fingers. James sank into unconsciousness. Baradiel whistled a little tune as he opened the portal and carried the human through. He would enjoy watching this unfold. Shame that he'd never followed through on his promise. If his plan worked out, all 7 candidates would be dead, and Saitar would be none the wiser. Thank you for listening. This has been Fragment of Divinity, Chapter 1, read to you by Jamey Sultan. If you would like to hear this audiobook actually read to you by a narrator, and not by me and my terrible voices, please check it out on Audible. Thanks for watching.